The International Forum of Terrorism Risk Insurance Pools, or ITRIP conference delegates, have described the global risk environment as increasingly complex. Now, the includes the challenges emanating from the impacts of climate change, political violence and terrorism. South Africa is hosting the conference, which is being held in Cape Town for the first time. Our reporter Vanessa Poonah has more for us.
Delegates from over 20 countries are attending the IFTRIP conference taking place in South Africa for the very first time. Insurers as well as representatives of governments are attending, talking about the growing risk of terrorism and also insurance covering those terrorism risks. I'm joined now by Colin Molepe. He is from ABC Insurance Company Limited. Very warm good day to you, Colin. So of course we see private sector as well as government representatives here today. Taking part in this conference, which will happen over the next few days. We talk about a growing terrorism risk. In the South African context, where do we fall?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. I think it's fair to say as a starting point that the risks we face today as a society are different to the risks we were facing yesterday. The second part is that what's happening in the global world, it may not be currently happening in South Africa, but it doesn't mean that it will actually reach our shores. So the significance of such an engagement is about preparation. It's about how do we respond to these kind of risks, because as underwriters, our job is to make sure that these events, when they occur, we are able to respond appropriately. So I would argue that it's quite important that we understand what's happening in other territories, what are the drivers for these events to happen, but more importantly, how would we prepare for those?
One of your fellow delegates from the Central African region a short while ago described South Africa as being on the cutting edge of terrorism risk as well as political violence or unrest risk insurance in that space. And while you say that South Africa may not face, I suppose, imminent terrorism threats, we do have neighbours that do, and ultimately the impact could be felt in this country as well. So where would you say do we rank as South Africa in terms of ensuring that we have the coverage necessary if, in the event of such events occurring?
Yeah, look, I think cutting edge might be a bit strong words to use. But I think as a country in the continent that is seeing quite a lot of traffic coming through from a tourism or other, it actually does suggest that we are not immune to this particular risk occurring in our country. I also believe that as a country, there are certain things that we are doing very well that may attract this kind of risk in the medium to near future. So I think for me, it's again about being aware. Because one of the things about risk is not about it's going to happen at a particular point in time. It may, or we may have tenets of it that are already in existence. For an example, when we onboard customers into our environment, we've got to make sure that we understand who these customers are. Because the reality is that they may exist in our environment at this point in time for a prolonged period of time, doing their planning, on such events, and therefore it is important that we can identify and prevent those proactively, because at the end of the day these clients are quite mobile. Some of them are being funded from abroad, but they may exist and live in South Africa to actually start preparing for these kind of events. So I think cutting edge, as I said, it's a bit strong, but I think it doesn't mean that we are immune to actually be harboring some of these individuals in our country.
Let's talk about some of the challenges. We've also heard the issues around kidnapping for ransom, which is very prevalent in, I suppose, some South American countries, which we've heard. In that context, is South Africa, I suppose, from an insurance point of view, prepared? Are we, keeping up with the trend in terms of that kind of insurance products?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've been offering and covering kidnap and ransom for an extended period of time. But what we've seen is an increase in the number of transactions where these things are happening. And I think I also would mention that in the past, you would actually think that this would only happen to certain individuals. But we've also seen that it could happen to individuals like you and I, for small transactions. And I think it's also quite important that we educate people about these things and make them understand, the risk that they are faced with. So I think it's been a rise in the kidnap and ransom incidents that are that we are seeing occur, but we've been on it and as a risk item that we actually cover for our clients.